In this episode, we're going to be looking at how to create scripts that will fill the board and set it up so that we have a two-dimensional array. And we're also going to use a game manager object, a board object, that is going to make it so that when we run the game, it is going to call those scripts to fill the board. Now at this point in time, it's all the same piece. We'll fix that in the next episode, but let's dive right in. Hey there, welcome back. So today we're going to be taking a look at how to use scripts to compartmentalize our logic, something that is one of the big things that's going to keep this tutorial series different than the previous one. The previous one I did everything inside the object code, which, while it made sense to me at the time to do it that way, makes it so that our logic is very much in one spot when we want it to be kind of more spread out. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to start by taking a look at exactly how to make and use scripts inside GameMaker Studio 2. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to my scripts over here on the right hand side under resources. I'm going to right click. I'm going to create a group here. Now my scripts are going to be separated into a bunch of different things. I'm going to have some scripts that are about the score, some scripts that are about bonuses and stuff like that. So I'm going to start with something that's relatively simple here, and we're going to make a group that contains all of the board scripts, all of the logic behind having the pieces actually show up in the grid like they should. So I'm going to call this first group here board scripts. And inside the board scripts, I'm going to start by creating one new script here. So right click on board script, choose create new script, and that opens this window here. Now I'm going to rename this script, so I'm going to need to right click to do that. I'm going to call this SCR underscore, and we'll call this setup board. And this needs to be all one word, which is why I'm using underscores here. Certain kinds, depending on what you're used to programming in, like Java, you would do this as capital S setup, capital B board, all one word. But this is the convention that GameMaker Studio themselves use with their own functions, so we might as well go with that. All right, now this is going to have, when you create a script in GameMaker Studio, you can pass in something like up to 15 different arguments. And the way you would call that, so in this case it would be in something else, we wouldn't do it from itself, SCR underscore setup board. And then anything that goes inside of these parentheses separated by commas are the arguments. So I could have it be like time, day, weather, feeling. And you can have up to 15 of these arguments when you're creating your own script in GML. We're obviously not going to be using these as our arguments. Our arguments are going to be more like width, height, where we want the board to start, where we want the how much space do we want between each piece. But this is how you would call a script from an object inside GML. Now what I want to do is I want to make sure that when I'm creating that script or when I'm calling that script that I have a little bit of helper text down here telling me what the arguments should be. And in order to create that in GameMaker Studio 2, so in GameMaker Studio 1.x, the way that you would do this is by having a triple backslash and then the name of the function and what the arguments are. In GameMaker Studio 2, we have to do the triple backslash and then tell it what the function is. And so this is going to be SCR underscore setup board. And this is going to require a width, which is how wide the board is, and a height, which is how many rows we want to have in the board. Now we can go further than this, but for now I'm just going to leave it there. Now when we're creating our script here, what we want to do is we want to first tell the script what each of these arguments are in the case of the script itself. So when GameMaker Studio 2 is looking at a script like this, it considers this first argument to be argument 0. Same like alarm start alarm 0 through however many you can have. This is argument 1, 2, 3, 4. So it starts with 0 instead of starting counting with 1. So I'm going to say width is equal to argument 0 and height is equal to argument 1. And this is just so that I can use width and height as my variables inside this script so that it'll make a bit more sense. These little yellow arrows mean that I've only used it once so far. Now what I want to do is, let's take a look at our room here really quickly so I can explain this. I want to go through all of my positions here. So I want to start here, create a piece there, and then here, 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 here. So finish out that column and then go and do the next column and the next and the next and the next. So for this column, which is column 0, because again we're starting at 0, and for this row, which is row 0, I'm going to put a piece. And then I'm going to move to column 0, row 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And then I'm going to move over to column 1, row 0, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3. So it's very similar to how you're used to seeing your XY coordinate system, except that we're starting at 0, 0 instead of starting at 1, 1. So what I want to do is I'm going to use something called a for loop to go over all of those. So I'm going to create a variable here that's going to kind of act as a temporary storage container for this grid that we're creating. So I'm going to call this var grid. Nope, let's call it board instead. So I just want to have a variable that's called board. Then I'm going to use two different for loops, like I said, to iterate over both the columns and the rows. So I'm going to say for var I starts at 0, because we're starting at 0 with the columns. I is less than the width. And then we want to increase by 1 every time. And the shorthand for increasing by 1 every time is plus plus, just like that. I'm going to open and close some curly braces. And that's going to go over all the columns. Now I want to go over all the rows as well. So I'm going to create another for loop inside of that first one. So this is going to be for var j is 0, j is less than height, j plus plus, and curly braces for that as well. And what I want to do here is I want to say board ij, meaning the space that's at the I, comma, j position on the board, just like an xy coordinate, except this time we're going to use the I and the j to represent columns and rows, is equal to no one. Then, after we create that, we want to, okay, cool. After we create that, we want to pass back this board variable to whatever value called this. So I'm going to say return, so that's going to move it back to whatever called the script board. All right, so I'm going to save this really quickly here, and let's talk about how this would be used. So, in games, currently we have just this test object here. In games, you can have a whole bunch of objects that exist only behind the scenes. You can have an object that works only to control the score, an object that works to control the camera, and these are things that you would never see as a player, but they're things that are necessary to keep the logic working behind the scenes. And it's really more necessary for the people who are designing the game to keep things straight in their head about exactly what's going on. We're going to create one of these objects here right now, and we're going to call it the board. So under objects, I'm going to right click, I'm going to create a new object. I'm going to call this obj underscore board. And this is not going to get a sprite. It is, however, going to get some variable definitions. Now, these variable definitions will allow us to have multiple rooms that all have a board in them, but that have maybe slightly different variables. Maybe there's different pieces that are available. Maybe there's a different width or different height of the rows. Maybe the pieces are more spaced out on one than they are on another. So we can change these definitions. So I'm going to, on the OBJ board, click Variable Definitions to open up this new menu, and I'm going to add a few here. So the first one I'm going to add, I'm going to call width, and this is going to be an integer. Integers are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to leave my default at 8 because that's what I have my room currently set up to. I'm going to add another one. I'm going to call this height, and I'm going to set my default here to be 8 as well. And this is also an integer. I'm going to create a variable for the offset, which is how far there is between each piece. and this is going to be 18, also an integer. And I'm going to create two more. X start, which is the X pixel position that I want to start my rows and columns at. And I'm going to need to look to find out what that is, but that's okay. And this is also an integer. And one more, which is Y start. And I'm going to leave that alone, but I'm going to make it an integer. All right, so there are my variable definitions. Now I'm going to add some events here. The first event I'm going to create, so I'll click Add Event, and this is going to go into the Create event. In GameMaker Studio, there's 4 basic events that everybody should know how to use. The rest of them are all kind of extra here. So there's the Create event, the Step event, the Alarm event, and the Draw event. We're going to be using the Create event here. In the Create event, we've got this triple backslash and then at description, just like we had that at function up here. We're going to insert our description, so we're going to call this create the board. And for the code here, first thing I'm going to do is create the board. So I'm going to do this by creating what's called a global variable. Global variables are able to be accessed through any script or object in the scene. So I'm going to say global.board is equal to scr_setupBoard, and I'm going to pass in the width and the height. And so the width is going to be the width from our variables, and the height is going to be the height from our variables. So there we go. Now this yellow flag is because we're only using it once. So what I want to do here is I'm going to show debug message, and I'm just going to have it print out global.board. Now this debug message is very helpful for you to know exactly what's going on behind the scenes. Now if I play this, I should see a setup here of exactly what the board looks like. So I'm going to actually put that down. Oh, I didn't actually add my board into the room. That's why I didn't see it. So let's go to the room test, resources. I'm going to grab obj board, and it doesn't matter where this goes since it doesn't have a sprite attached to it. It's just going to be somewhere in the room. Let's save that and let's try this again. So let's hit play. And it's going to think for a second. Now, these -4s, that's what GameMaker uses as a shorthand for no one. But you can see it made 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 arrays of 8 things inside of it each. And so each of these -4s represents knowing that it's no one. All right, so that is, let me actually quit out of this too. That's creating our board. So now our board exists in the world. The next thing that we want to do is let's make another script specifically to fill the board with random pieces. Now to do that, I'm going to go back to board scripts. I'm going to create a new script, and this is going to be at function, and I'm going to call this scr_fill board, and this is going to take quite a few arguments. It's going to need to know the width of the board, the height of the board, needs to know how much offset there is between pieces, where to start the board at, so X start and Y start. Okay, now okay, so now what I want to do is pretty much the same thing I just did. I'm going to say, let's say that argument, or sorry, width is equal to argument 0 is equal to argument 0, height is equal to argument 1, offset equals argument 2. So I'm just assigning each of the things inside the script to be equal to one of the arguments that's passed into it. Xstart is equal to argument 3. YStart is equal to argument 4. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do another double for loop. So I'm going to say for var I starting at 0, I is less than width, I plus plus. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the columns. So for var j starting at 0, j is less than height, j plus plus. Now what I want to do here is I want to say that my global.grid, and then I want to set the ij value to be equal to instance create layer. Now if you're using GameMaker Studio 1.x, it's just instance create. And I need to tell it where to create it. So the x position is going to be at x start, and the y position is going to be at y start. But there's going to be an issue with this, and I'll show you what it is in just a second. The layer ID is instances, and the object we want to create is going to be obj_test. Now I'm going to add another debug message here just to prove that it worked the way I thought it should. So I'm going to show debug message made gem. All right, so now what I want to do is go to my board object, and in the creation code I'm going to create that that board. Oh, I never actually renamed this one. So let's rename this. This should be scr_fill board. All right, and so we're going to call that from the creation code, fill board, and we're going to pass in our different arguments here. So we're going to pass in the width, the height, the offset, the x start, and the y start. Now, the x start and the y start, if you remember when we did our variable definitions, I set those as 0. There's going to be a problem with that, and let's actually show you what the problem is before I try and fix it. So let's hit play right now. It's going to think for a second. Interesting. Did I get all those debug messages I thought I would? Yeah, so it made all the gems, like so many. Oh, that's why. It's because it's beneath. Okay, so it made all of these gems. You can see that there's 80 of them, or not 80, 64 gems that it made, but I didn't see them anywhere. I only saw this one. And let's actually get this test out of here. So I'm just going to delete that. Let's save. Now the problem is it's going to make these gems right up here, which puts it below the foreground. So for the moment I'm just going to pop the instances above everything, just so you can see that they're going to be created in this upper corner here, which is what GameMaker considers to be 0, 0. So you can only see one, but there's really 64 of them down there. So I'm going to move this back to where I want it to be. Let's save. Now, the reason it did that is because when we're calling the fill board, we're only putting it at the x start and the y start. Now, x start and y start by default are 0, 0, so we're going to need to change that in the version of the board that is here. And if I click on it, I can go to my variables, and now I can actually change these by pressing the little right key there. Now my x start and my y start, I'm actually not sure where they are. I know I wrote them down last time, but I moved it. But I'm just going to put this where I want it to be to start, and then I'm just going to look at its xy position. So it looks like we want it at 108.36. All right. So for here, I'm going to go to variables. I'm going to change the x start to be 108. And I'm going to change the y start to be 36. Now, you can see why this one might be helpful, because you can have another room where maybe you don't want your pieces to start in the same place. Maybe you want them to start over here or down there. And by doing the variables like this, it's much, much easier than it used to be. In GameMaker Studio 1.4, to do the same thing, you can't use this variables menu. You'd have to go to creation code, and in the creation code, change it. So, I mean, you can still do it in 1.x if you're following along using that, but it's a little bit different. Okay, so I'm going to X out of there. And now there's still an issue though if I hit play, and you'll see it right away. So now we've got our 64 gems that are all right there. We want them to be evenly spaced. So we're going to go back to our workspace here, and here's where the offset comes into play. So in my room, I'm going to start with my piece here, and then my next piece, or my next column, I want to be 18 pixels over. 18 pixels is the offset, so that means that I need to do whatever the X start is plus 18. And this one would be the X start plus 2 times 18, 3 times 18, 4, 5. So what I can do there is say that my X position is X start plus I times the offset. And I'm going to do the same thing for the Y start, except that GameMaker counts up as you go down on Y. So it's the opposite of what you would think. So I'm going to say Y start plus I times the negative offset. All right, I'm going to save that, and let's try this now. I'm going to hit play. Oh, look at that. All right, what did I do wrong? Oh, I did I both times. This should be J. There we go. Save that. Let's hit play. And let's see how it works. All right, so what did it do? So it went up when it should have went down. Oh, so it doesn't, I see. You can just be offset. Good Lord. Mr. Taft. So let's hit play. There we go. So we've got our whole board full. Now it's full of the same piece, and if you stare at that shine too much, it might like drive you insane. But we'll cover how to make these pieces not, for number one, not shine so crazily, and number two, be different pieces in each spot next time. But for today, we were just kind of talking about how to create scripts and how to use those scripts from an object. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. You can follow me on Twitter to find out when I post new videos. You can join my Discord, tons of really cool people there. And yeah, otherwise, I hope everybody has themselves a wonderful day.